All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Want to be respectful of your time. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Brenda Smeaton, and I am the Legal Director of Georgia Justice Project. I am here with a few of my colleagues, Tiffany Gordon, who's a staff attorney, Erin Donahue-Keeler, who's an attorney and our pro bono coordinator, and Dominique Madison, who is a paralegal and our intake supervisor. All of us are going to be speaking a little bit today about getting a pardon in Georgia, which is now the path to felony expungement. We are expecting a rather large group today, so we are going to wait and we will try to answer some questions as they come in. Please use the Q&A function. We will try to monitor chat as well, but it would be easiest if you use the Q&A function. Once we are through with the main part of our presentation, any of the questions that we haven't covered, we will come back and try to cover those. All right, and just one other thing about questions is we are a rather large group. We cannot answer questions on this webinar about your personal situation and your personal application for a pardon. So if you could keep your questions general about the process and applying for a pardon. And at the end, Dominique is going to talk about how you can connect with us to apply for services. And then the last thing I want to mention before we move on is it says the path to felony expungement. So most of us are familiar with the word expungement, meaning to clear your criminal history. In Georgia, that process is actually called restriction and sealing. It's a two-step process, but since most people know the word expungement and that's what most states use, we kind of use the words interchangeably, and we will talk a little bit about how that process works in Georgia as we go along. All right. So I'm going to go briefly a little bit over Georgia Justice Project in case you are not familiar with us, and do some broad strokes about getting a pardon and what a pardon can mean for you, and then just very briefly talk about how pardons fit into the general picture of clearing your record in Georgia. And then Tiffany is going to come on and talk about the pardon process and submitting a pardon application, and Erin is going to talk about how you can apply for assistance. All right, so a little bit about Georgia Justice Project. We are a legal nonprofit organization. We've been around for 36 years. We work in the criminal legal system to repair some of the harm that is created by that system. And to do that, we work towards two goals: reducing the number of Georgians under correctional control and also reducing barriers to reentry. We do that in three different ways, utilizing three different strategies. One is individual representation. So we are a law office. We represent individuals who need help at various stages of the criminal legal system. We also work to change laws in Georgia and policies to reduce barriers to reentry. And we do a lot of community outreach around the state and building partnerships with different organizations to advance our mutual goals. So what you can see in this slide is sort of a representation of all what we call our arc of justice, the different stages of the criminal legal system. Georgia Justice Project works at pretty much every stage of the criminal legal system. What we've been doing for our entire 36-year history is we represent people that have pending criminal cases in Fulton and DeKalb County. And we provide holistic defense. So what that means is all of our clients are assigned a social worker who can assist them with whatever issues they may have going on. We also follow our clients if they are convicted and help them re-enter when they leave prison. And we do some work in a local prison, the Metro Reentry Facility, helping the men who are incarcerated there prepare for re-entry. And then probably the largest part of our work and what we're really talking about today is our record clearing work, our expungement work. We represent individuals Through our office, we also participate in a lot of events around the state, what we usually call record restriction summits or record clearing summits, and we do those in partnerships with local prosecutors around the state and community partners. We've done about 55 of them over the last 5 years. And then our last strategy for helping people with their record is a new one that we started last year, which is through an expungement desk. We opened a desk in Cobb County and have been working with community partners up there to streamline the process so that a lot of people will be able to clear their record. And then over all of those stages, like I mentioned, we work on policy work. And one of the reasons that we are here today talking about pardons is one of our biggest policy accomplishments was in 2020. It went into effect in 2021 when we drafted and worked with a coalition of folks to pass Senate Bill 288, which expanded expungement in Georgia. Up until that time, it was primarily only non-convictions that you could get off of your record. Finally, we were able to move more in line with some other states in adding convictions into what a person can potentially get restricted and sealed from their record. And we are going to talk as we go out throughout this presentation about what that means for you. So why are we here today to talk about pardons? What is a pardon? A pardon is an order of official forgiveness from the state. In Georgia, pardons are granted by the State Board of Pardons and Paroles after you go through an application process. You submit the application and then the board considers it. It's a 5-member board. If 3 members of the board vote to grant your application for a pardon, then it will be granted. So a lot of folks think that the president grants pardons. That is not the case for a state offense. That is for federal offenses. Generally, pardons are for felony convictions. There are some rare occasions when you can get a misdemeanor conviction pardoned, and we'll talk about those a little bit, but primarily we're talking about it for felonies. So there are 2 kinds of pardons that a person can get. One is the general pardon, and that is something that you can apply for 5 years after you are off paper. So you're no longer on probation or parole. You completed your sentence and then 5 years have passed. If you are required to register as a sex offender, then you have to wait 10 years until you are off paper. And there is a whole separate application and process for that, which is not what we're going to focus on today. But if you would like information about that, feel free to reach out directly to us. Pardons are important and becoming increasingly important after the recent changes in the law. One of the reasons they're important is they protect employers. So a lot of folks that come to us because they want help with their record, it's because they're having trouble getting a job or getting a better job and advancing their career. When you get a pardon, it provides what's called negligent hiring protection for employers. So if something should happen, which isn't likely, but if something should happen later on down the road, that employer is protected in a potential lawsuit. A couple other things to know is that there is no cost to apply for a pardon, and you do not necessarily need an attorney. I do want to mention that there are a couple of other forms of relief that the State Board of Pardons and Paroles grants. The first one is called a restoration of civil and political rights, which is something that's included in a pardon if you apply for a general pardon at that 5-year mark. You can apply for a restoration of rights 2 years after you are off paper. It really gets you 3 different things. 1, you can serve on a jury, you can be a notary, and you can run for and hold office. But it doesn't get you necessarily that certificate of rehabilitation, and it doesn't put you in a place where you can then go on to expunge your record. But just be aware that that is something that you can apply for at that 2-year mark. Also, the board does restoration of firearms rights. When you're convicted of a felony, you lose your firearms rights in Georgia. You can apply to have those rights restored also at that 5-year mark when you can apply for a pardon. Last thing I want to say is, and I should have said this a little bit earlier, we've got a lot of material to go over and I'm trying to go through it quickly. But we want you to know that we understand how much having a criminal record, in particular a felony conviction, which is what we can address through pardons, can impose a barrier to you, to employment, to finding a place to live, to getting an occupational license, virtually every area of your life. So what we hope is that we can help some of you be able to complete this process and move on and have your record cleared, so you will not experience those barriers in the same way. And then the other thing that I want to say is, if you are stressed about all these barriers that you are experiencing because of your record, we understand that, and you should know that you're not alone. In Georgia, 4.6 million people have a criminal history, so we're talking about 30 to 40% of adults, and also over 600,000 have a felony conviction on their record. So there's a lot of people in the situation that you are in, which is why it's so important that we begin to change policies that put so many people in that position, and to help people be able to move on from their record. So who can apply for a general pardon? Like I said, it's generally for felony offenses, occasionally misdemeanors. You have to be off paper for 5 years. That doesn't mean when you move to non-reporting status. So if you've been on probation, you may have experienced a situation where after 2 years you were put on non-reporting. You didn't have to go see your probation officer anymore. That doesn't necessarily mean that your probation is done. Your probation actually has to be completed, and then 5 years have to be passed before you can apply for a pardon. Sometimes that wait time can be waived, and we will talk about that a little bit more at the end, but you should know that that is a rare occurrence. The main thing that you need to know is that according to the board, you have to have lived a law-abiding life for 5 years before applying for a pardon. And we will talk more about that, what that means, but generally it means that you haven't been arrested or convicted of anything in the 5 years before you apply for a pardon. The state board also says that you have to have paid your fines and restitution. We're going to go into a little bit more depth with that, probably in the questions and answers. Restitution is definitely important. Often you're not able to terminate your probation until you've paid your restitution. Fines are a little bit more of a gray area, because sometimes your sentence may be terminated, your probation may be terminated before you have completed all of your fines. So if you had some outstanding fines when your sentence was completed, you should know that that isn't necessarily a bar from you applying for a pardon. Also, what is an absolute bar is that you can't have any open cases or pending charges when you apply. One of the big questions that we get is, does a pardon clear my record? So on its own, what a pardon gets you is a certificate of rehabilitation from the State Board of Pardons and Paroles. It does not clear your record. So when you get a pardon, it doesn't mean that an employer is not going to be able to see your record. It just means that you're going to have this certificate of rehabilitation, and there's going to be a notation on your criminal history that you have received a pardon for that felony conviction. As I mentioned, as of 2021, you can now request expungement of your conviction if you receive a pardon for it. But one thing to be aware of is that although you can apply for a pardon for any kind of conviction, serious violent felonies and serious sex offenses are excluded from the expungement portion of the law. So even if you get a pardon for a serious violent felony or a serious sex offense, you cannot then ask the court to seal the record of that conviction. And the last thing I want to mention on the big picture there is everything I'm talking about is related to Georgia convictions and the Georgia pardon process, because the process is going to be different for every state. So I mentioned after you get a pardon, you can then petition the court that originally sentenced you, and by petition I mean submit a written motion to the court asking the court to restrict and seal the record of your pardoned conviction. So what does that mean? I mentioned that restriction and sealing kind of together make up what most states call expungement, that it is a two-step process here. The first step of the process is called restriction. What restriction does is it makes it so that only law enforcement can see the record of your arrest or conviction on your official criminal history. Your official criminal history in Georgia is maintained by the Georgia Crime Information Center, usually called GCIC. And they maintain records from all over Georgia. Arresting agencies, courts are all entering information. When the cops stop you, they are going to pull up a copy of your GCIC report. If you get your record restricted, then an employer who pulls a copy of your GCIC or a housing provider is not going to be able to see the record of that offense. Once you get your record restricted, you can then ask the court to seal it. And for a pardon, you can ask for both of these things at the same time. When we seal a record, we are actually sealing the records that are on file at the courthouse, both the hard copy file and any electronic index that may be available. When we ask the court to seal a record, we're asking them to look at the harm that may be occurring to you as a result of your record being available in terms of you not being able to get a job or find a place to live, versus the public's interest in knowing about that particular conviction on your record. If the judge decides that that balancing test tips in your favor, then they can order that the record of your pardoned conviction be sealed. Once it is sealed, it will no longer show up, or it should no longer show up on private background check companies. So most of the time when we go to apply for a job, an employer is not going to be looking at our GCIC record. They're going to be pulling a private background check from a company like HireRight or Sterling Infosystems, ADP. Those companies get their records directly from the courthouses. So when we seal that record, we make it so that those companies cannot access those records and cannot report it to a potential employer or housing provider. All right, so I did just want to list out here because they are excluded, what those exclusions are. And what this means is if you were ultimately convicted of one of these offenses and you do receive a pardon for it, you cannot get it restricted and sealed. But if you were originally charged with one of these and then you pled to something that was maybe a lesser included or a less serious offense, then you would still be able to get the record of that conviction expunged. A couple more things before I turn it over. So what if you already have a pardon? Great news for you. You don't have to go through the process that we're going to be talking about of applying for it all over again now that the law has changed. You can go ahead and file that petition with the court to restrict and seal the record of your pardoned conviction. If you got your pardon a while ago or you don't have a copy of your pardon anymore, you can send an email to this address in order to get a copy of that pardon. And you don't need a copy that has like a raised seal on it or is notarized or anything to include along with your petition to the court. A couple of other things I want to mention. This is very important. A lot of people think that they have to get a pardon in Georgia in order to be able to vote if they've been convicted of a felony. That is not true. In Georgia, when you complete your felony sentence, you can automatically, your right to vote is restored. You still have to re-register, just like anybody would have to re-register, like if they moved or something like that. But the only time that your criminal history, your criminal record keeps you from voting in Georgia is if you are currently serving a sentence for a felony conviction. So you're in prison, you're on probation, you are on parole. An important exception to that is if you were sentenced under first offender. So that's kind of Georgia's second chance law. If you were, if it's the first time that you had a felony offense, or it can be for misdemeanors as well, but misdemeanors don't come into play for voting. But if you received first offender for your felony, then it is not a conviction unless you your probation, your first offender status gets revoked, and then it becomes a conviction. But if you are currently under first offender status, you can still vote. So as long as you are off paper, then you can register to vote just like anybody else can. And there's plenty more information on our website about voting. And I think someone will probably drop a link in the chat. And also this QR code can be used to take you to our website to give you more information about voting. Okay, and then the last thing I want to mention, I said that, but now I look ahead and I see I've got a couple more slides. But I do want to mention, like I said, you can't vote until your felony sentence is complete. And also you can't apply for a pardon until you're 5 years after your sentence is complete. So that can be a long time, particularly if you have a long probation sentence. Well, fortunately, Georgia Justice Project worked with some partners to address this issue last year, and we were able to get a new law passed. It was Senate Bill 105 that allows everyone to petition the court or to automatically be eligible to terminate their probation after 3 years if certain criteria are met, and those criteria are listed here. So you've served at least 3 years, you haven't had any revocations in the last 24 months, no new arrests, and you've paid all your restitution. So also plenty more information about this on our website, and feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. But that can be a very important thing to do, both to restore your right to vote and to put you in line to apply for a pardon a little quicker than you might be otherwise. Okay, so I did want to talk for just a minute about where pardons fit into the big picture of criminal records and criminal record clearing in Georgia. We are not going over all of this information here. We will drop a link in the chat box about how you can sign up for one of our First Fridays presentations, where we do a summary of all the different ways that you can clean up your record, because not everybody is in a position where they are looking to get a pardon. Maybe you have your biggest concern is a non-conviction on your record or something else. So big picture on records, I'm going to go to the right side first. Most non-convictions in Georgia can be restricted and sealed from your record. So if you had first offender and you successfully complete it, then it's eligible to be restricted and sealed. If you had a case that was placed on the dead docket, which is something that happens particularly a lot in Fulton County, your case is put on hold. If it's been on the dead docket for a year, you might be able to get that off. There is a court process for that. If your case just didn't result in a conviction, so it was null prossed or dismissed, or it was an ordinance violation, then you can generally get those off. And if you went to trial and you were acquitted of all the charges. So it is important for us to go ahead and get those non-convictions off, because employers can use those against you. And most of those are eligible to come off. So we know that convictions are the category that can cause the biggest barriers. So how can we get convictions off? So there are 3 different ways for both misdemeanors and felonies. The first one is something called retroactive first offender. I mentioned first offender before. It's Georgia's kind of second chance law. If you were never convicted of a felony before, you never used first offender, then you can be sentenced as a first offender. And as long as you complete your sentence, then it's not a conviction and it can be restricted and sealed. Well, let's say you didn't know about first offender, you didn't ask about it, you didn't get it, but it's 10 years later. You've got 1 conviction on your record. Let's say I was convicted of felony drug possession, only charge on my record, only conviction on my record. I didn't know about first offender. I might be able to go back now and get resentenced as a first offender, and then that would not be a conviction and I could have it sealed from my record. So that's a really powerful remedy. I'm going to skip down to the bottom and talk about Survivors First Act, which is also a new law. This is a really powerful remedy that allows individuals who are survivors of human trafficking, so that's sex trafficking or labor trafficking, to potentially get the record of their conviction actually vacated, so it is not a conviction, or restricted and sealed. If you have any questions about that or think that that's a category that you may fall into, it's a very broad law. It's not, a lot of times when we think about sex trafficking, we think just about prostitution charges and things like that, but there are no excluded offenses under this law. If you have a conviction on your record that occurred because you were being trafficked or while you were being trafficked, then there's some great remedies out there to be able to clear up your record. So reach out to us about that. And then the last category, which we've already started talking about, is just general restriction and sealing, or expungement. So the big change in the law in 2021 is that now an individual can petition the court to potentially restrict and seal up to 2 misdemeanor convictions on their record. And that doesn't mean charges, that means incidents. So say I had 3 misdemeanor charges on, in 1 incident, 1 arrest, that counts as 1 of my lifetime limit of 2. There are some exceptions. We go into that in our First Friday's presentation. And then, of course, felonies, in order to get a felony conviction off our record, if we're not eligible for those other two remedies, we do have to go through that pardon process first, which is why we're talking about this. All right, now I am going to turn it over. I'm not sure, Tiffany, are you up next or is Erin up next?
Hey, Brenda, yeah, I'm up next. Thank you. So I'm going to be going over the pardon application process. Make sure that I can click through. There we go. So first we'll give an overview of the process, and then we'll get into the different sections that are involved, any documents that you might have to collect in attempting to obtain a pardon. And so the first thing that we recommend individuals do is review the State Board of Pardon and Parole's application that's posted online. You don't have to be an attorney to fill out this application or submit a pardon application. And so that's the first thing that we recommend individuals do. The application is broken down to a number of sections. So sometimes we tell people that they can essentially take it section by section. There is a lot of information that you have to include in a pardon application. And so we recommend that individuals kind of break it down, take their time and work through the application that way. The next step would be to gather the necessary documents. And so the necessary documents that you would need to gather are a Georgia Crime and Information Center criminal history report. And that lists essentially most of the arrests on your record in the state of Georgia. And so the version that you would request is a purpose code U, and you can obtain that for a fee at any arresting agency. The other documents that you would have to get is what's called a disposition for cases that you are seeking the pardon for. And so we would recommend that you get a disposition. It's necessary actually that you get a disposition for each case that you're requesting a pardon for. And you may see that some cases on your Georgia Crime and Information Center report don't have a disposition. And so if it doesn't have a disposition and it says something like time expired restriction, you may need to gather information on that particular case to let the board know exactly what happened. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. The next step that we recommend is complete the application. As I said, there are a number of sections in the application that you'll have to complete. And so you make sure that you've completed every single part of the application. We recommend that if you don't know what to put in a section, or if there is a section that does not apply to you, then we recommend that you put not applicable or N/A in that portion of the application. The next step, you would sign the oath and a waiver, and you have to get the application notarized. And so after that, you would mail a hard copy of the application with the required attachments to the State Board of Pardon and Parole. And we also have a few additional materials that we would recommend that you include with your application to make it as strong as application as possible. And then the other thing is that we recommend that you keep a copy of your whole packet that you've submitted to the board for your records, just in case they ask any questions. Sometimes we see the board come back and ask for dispositions or additional information. And so you want to keep all your documents so you know exactly what was submitted and can get that information to them as soon as they ask for it. And so the entire process from submission takes about 6 to 9 months for a decision to be made on a pardon application. And so in between that 6 to 9 months, the board is reviewing the application. They are verifying some of the information that is included. They may reach out to you for additional information. And there's also an interview that happens towards the end of the process. And Erin will talk about that a little bit later. And so understanding your criminal history. Understanding your criminal history in the pardon process is very important. The GCIC is the document, as I mentioned, that has your criminal history report in the state of Georgia. The GCIC database has information about every arrest for a fingerprintable offense. And so there are different levels to the access of the GCIC's information depending on who is requesting that information. And so for the purposes of getting a pardon, you'll need to get both a purpose code U and a copy of a purpose code E. And so first, you're going to use the purpose code U to see if there are any dispositions or results of the case that are not entered on your Georgia Crime and Information Center record. And so what that will say is time expired restriction. And you can see an example on the other side of the screen showing time expired restriction for non-criminal justice purposes. And so if you see that, then you know that that is a case for which you need to gather a final disposition or a disposition from the clerk of courts in that particular jurisdiction to submit with your pardon application. Next, you're going to use a purpose code E to submit with your pardon application. And so we want to make sure that you're sure that you specify which purpose code you want when you're going to get your record. We recommend that you don't share your purpose code U with anyone. That is your individual record and shouldn't be shared with anyone other than your attorney. And like I said, time expired restriction cases, you need to gather a disposition for those in addition to the dispositions on the cases for which you're seeking a pardon. And so there are different types of applications that you can submit for. I also just want to note that soon the pardon application will be online starting January 2023. But as of now, the pardon application is still a paper application. And so for the electronic application in the future, all applicants are going to be required to submit an electronic application using a link that's going to be provided on their website. And so you would be selecting a general pardon for future expungement. If there are multiple convictions can be included on one application. So if you have 5 felony convictions on your record, you can request a pardon on all 5 on all 5 felony convictions through one application. And so you'll also look through the application and you may see that that they say that you can attach an additional page to add additional information. And so we recommend that you use it. If there is a place to add information or give more information on who you are, how your life has changed, we recommend that you use those additional pages to add that information. We also, as I said before, include not applicable or NA if any section does not apply to your situation or does not apply to you. You can put NA in that particular section. And then also, most importantly, we recommend that you be honest and as accurate as possible. The State Board of Pardon Parole will verify all of the information and you will be signing the application under oath. So just make sure that that you have as accurate information as possible, updated phone numbers, emails, anything like that. Make sure that all of that information is, as I said, honest and accurate. And so there's a portion of the application that's dedicated after asking for your addresses for the last 10 years and your name and whether or not you're married, anything like that. There's demographic information. So they want to know whether you're married and any family information. And so in this particular part of the application, they're referring to legal marriage, not necessarily common law. We understand that people live together for many years, are in love and refer to those people as their partners and are connected in that way. But in this, under Georgia law and under this application, they're referring to a legal marriage. The other thing that they may ask about in demographic information is child support. And so if you're in debt or if you owe child support, you may want to attach a sheet explaining any attempts that you have made to make payments, explaining that that it may have been an issue of not having employment, being incarcerated, maybe issues with the pandemic and making payments in that way. And so as we said, this is another area that we said that can attach a sheet and explain in more detail any debtor information that you might want to give to the board about your attempts to make payments. The other area is housing. And so you want to make sure that you just note that on that portion of the application, it's in reverse chronological order. So where you're living now is where you go first, and then from there you go back 10 years. The next section that we're going to go over is the education, military, and employment section. In this section, they are asking about information about education, any training programs, and we recommend that you include any programs that you have completed. If you've been through a Goodwill program, if you've completed some college, maybe not all, if you've got it any partial credit, the board wants to know more about you, wants to know a full picture about what you've been doing and all the good things that you may have been trying to accomplish during the time since your arrest or conviction. And so, like I said, we recommend putting any sort of programming, any trainings, any certificates, any of that information that you have. We recommend that you put that information down there. And if you have any certificates or anything like that, you can include those documents as well. The other section is military service. If you were honorably discharged from the military, if you were honorably discharged, you may include the discharge. If you're honorably discharged, you can keep your response brief. We recommend that you don't necessarily re-argue what may have happened that led to that, but we just recommend mentioning that that we're in the military and a little bit, just a brief response about being discharged. And the other area is employment. And so we recommend that you attach you have to attach your W-2, especially if you'd rather the board not contact your current employer. And so if you have a W-2 that you can attach to the application, that is probably the best thing that you can submit along with any other employment information. In this section, we recommend that they ask why you may have left the job. We say, recommend that you write that you left for a new opportunity, or you wanted to move on to a new area of work versus maybe information about a bad employer or a bad experience that you may have had. The board is looking for open and honest information, but we want to show where you may have been, where you moved on from there. And so we recommend kind of expressing, the need to look on for a new opportunity and moving on from another employer. If you're unemployed, we recommend that you explain, any attempts made toward getting a job. If you applied for jobs and weren't able to get a job because you had a record, you can, place that down there. If you were fired or if there was any misconduct, we recommend that you be as honest as possible in submitting that information. We recommend that, that you kind of just let them know, hey, this is, I worked at this place. I was, I may have been fired from this position, and let them know exactly what happened. And again, in this section, you want to note that it is reverse chronological order. And so that means that you would list where you're working now, or if you're unemployed, list that you're unemployed now, and then go back through your history for the last few years. The next section is treatment completion and financial information. And so in terms of treatment, if you've completed any treatment, and this area is very broad. So if you've completed inpatient, outpatient, short-term, long-term, any court-ordered treatment, if you've gone to AA meetings or NA meetings at any point, any sort of recovery programs, any sort of program that you may have completed, any spiritual programs that you may have completed, anything that's had an impact on your life, we recommend that you place that on the application. And really just, this is another opportunity where you can explain the ways in which treatment may have, the way in which treatment may have had an impact on your life and may have assisted you in getting to where you are now. And if you're currently in treatment, you can also list that as well and make sure that that information is available to the board and so that they know that you're currently receiving treatment and moving forward. The other area is civil and financial. And so the civil and financial area is really an area where they're talking about debt that's gone into collections. And so if you have some debt that has gone into collections or you've been named a party in a lawsuit, we recommend that you include any proof of what may have happened with those debts, list them down, and any proof that you've satisfied any of the debts or if you've paid any of those debts. If you can get any of that proof, we think that that's important to include as well. And it's also another opportunity where you can explain any attempts that you may have made at making payments on any of those debts. The next section is charitable and community activities. And so this is another broad area that I think that, that you may be able to express or explain more to the board about who you are and the things that you may have been doing. And so a lot of times we think about, charity and community activities in a very narrow way, but we think it, it can include service days, clubs, recreational groups, any mentoring that you might be doing to anyone in the community, if you've been helping a neighbor, if you've been donating clothes or money, or helping out at church after, helping out after church with any sort of events or anything that they're having. Those are things that we recommend that you put on your application to show that you are involved in your community and the type of person that you are now and the ways in which you are helping and contributing to society. And so, and also I always tell people, sometimes we don't know, we don't remember or think of the things that we may have done. And so this might be a good place for other people to kind of plug in that you trust to talk about this process with, and, ask them, hey, you remember any community activities or charitable activities that I've been involved in? And sometimes people can help jog your memory in that way. And so this is the next section, version of offenses. This section and the next section are essentially one of the most important. They're all important, but these are one of the most important parts of the pardon application. And so we'll be going over that a little bit in depth so that you can really understand, what this section is looking for and what the board, what type of information the board is looking for. And so the version of offenses, the goal of this section is really to just take accountability. They're going to be asking, they're asking for your version of what happened, not what happened exactly, but they want you to explain all the convictions on your pardon applications, including any violations of probation that may have been included. And so we recommend that you give a brief explanation of the factual circumstances of the case. And so an example would be, I was convicted of felony drug possession in, let's say, Fulton County. I was stopped for making an illegal turn. They searched the car and the officers found a small amount of cocaine in the glove compartment. And so, you can write, at that time, I was in the midst of my addiction and I was sentenced to 5 years of probation, which I successfully completed. And so it really is just a matter of the facts of what may have happened to your case. We also recommend for this section to have someone else read it. They may spot some gaps or some information and assist you in being able to say, maybe this is something you can leave out, maybe this is something that you should leave in. But really, like I said, this is a factual reciting of what happened with the case. And so another area that you might have to put a little bit more detail in is if you're asking for a pardon on a serious offense or one that involves a victim or residential burglary. And so for those type of cases, we recommend that you provide a little bit more detail about that case and about what may have happened and what may have been happening in your life during that time, or what may have been happening with the case during that time. And a few don'ts that we recommend: don't dispute or disagree with the facts of the case. We recommend that you kind of just lay out the case, the facts of the case in a clear way so they can understand how the case happened. We would recommend not assigning blame to other things, system, or other people. We completely understand that this is, that a lot of times that people have been wronged through the criminal justice system. But we don't think that this is, a section to explain that. But we think that there is another section that I'll discuss next where you may be able to explain a little bit more about the circumstances of what happened. So the version of offenses, again, is just a relevant factual listing of what happened with that case. And this is the justification for a pardon section. This is the other very important section that I mentioned. And so the goal of this section is really just to demonstrate a positive reputation in the community and rehabilitation. And so it's really just about saying, this is what has been, this is what I've been doing since my arrest in the case. And so you can explain, okay, I successfully completed my sentence. If you're able to say that, that's something that is good to put on your application. Any changes in your life since the arrest. And so any emotional, spiritual, any sort of life changes, if you've purchased a home, if you've moved into your own apartment, if you are working in a field that you're interested in, if you if there may have been something that happened that caused you to change, maybe a death in the family, or some sort of experience that has caused you to move your life in a different direction, this is the place where you would want to add that information. And so, like you said, highlight any progress since your sentence, education, any professions, treatment completion, job training, readiness programs, anything that you have to show what you've been doing is important to explain to the board. We understand that you are more than your Georgia Crime and Information Center report, that you have a whole life and things that are going on that are important to you, but the board doesn't know that. And so this is your opportunity to really get that information out there and share what you've been doing and the positive ways in which you've been moving forward. And so you include diplomas, certificates, any licenses, and also just explain how your record has been a barrier. If it's been a barrier to going to school, to working, to moving into a career that you're interested in, you can explain that your record has been a barrier, and that's why you're here asking for a pardon now. Also, very important, this is an important place to acknowledge any out-of-state convictions. The board will be doing a check of your entire your record from across the country. And so you want to make sure that you're acknowledging any out-of-state convictions that you may have, and just make sure that you put that down on there as well. Just one don't that we kind of recommend, don't miss the opportunity to show how hard you worked to get to where you are today. A lot of times people don't want to brag, they don't want to say the different things that they're doing, but we tell people all the time, hey, brag. If you have a business that you're starting, you know, if you're interested in doing some things, if you've been helping out family and friends, if you've been volunteering, if you've been working hard, if you've been going to school, this is the place where you want to put all of that information and make sure that it's included so that the board knows all of the things that you're doing. And again, I also think this is a good place. I know it's hard for people to brag on themselves and share information about, you know, the good things that they're doing. This might be a good place to plug in any family or friends or anyone you know that knows that you're going through this process to kind of help you highlight and pull out that information and remind you of the good things that you have been doing and the ways in which you may have grown. The other thing is that in this process, you'll also be gathering letters of recommendation. And so when gathering letters of recommendation and going through this process, when you first start, I always tell people to think about who you might want to get to sign or to submit a letter of recommendation on your behalf that knows, you know, who you were then, preferably someone who knows who you were then and who knows who you are now. But if not, just someone who knows how hard you're working and who you are and where you're at today. And so I will be turning over this part of the presentation to Erin.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. I'm going to talk a little bit more just about what you need to submit with the application, and then get into a little bit about how you can connect with Georgia Justice Project. So this slide and the next slide talk about a lot of the same things. It's just a different format of looking at the same information. There are certain documents that are required for you to submit to the board along with your pardon application itself. So you have to submit a copy of your GCIC report. And again, we suggest that you actually get 2 different reports. So at the very beginning of the process, we recommend that you get the Purpose Code U report, which again will show you every arrest you've had as an adult. And you really need to see that before you begin this process, so you know what additional court documents, what additional dispositions you're going to need. But then when you're actually submitting the pardon application to the board, we recommend that you submit a Purpose Code E. And just to note that this particular report has to be generated within 30 days of applying. So just make sure you're doing that right before you're ready to actually submit your pardon application. Tiffany went over this, but you also need those dispositions, both for any arrest that is time expired restricted on your purpose code U report and for any cases that you are seeking the pardon for. And they also ask that you submit an envelope so that the board can get back to you when they need to. The column on the right describes things that we recommend you include with your application. So these are not required by the board, but we do find that they're helpful to make a strong application to the board. So we always include a cover letter, just another opportunity to introduce yourself and get to show the board a little bit about you and why you're so passionate about seeking a pardon. We also always submit photos with our pardon applications, photos of our clients and photos of them with their family, because the board does receive hundreds of applications every year. And while you will get to have an interview with an investigator from the board members themselves won't actually get to see you. So this is a way that you get to show them, I'm a person and the decision that you're making affects me and my whole community. We also suggest that you submit letters of recommendation. And I have that asterisk here because if you're applying for a restoration of firearm rights, you actually have to submit letters of recommendation. So the letters have to be from non-family members, and they should, talk about how the person knows you, how long they've known you, and why they think that you are deserving of a pardon or of a restoration of firearm rights. And just a note there that those letters have to include the contact information for the letter writer and need to be signed and notarized, again, if you're doing the firearms restoration process. So just some things to note there. And then we suggest that you submit any additional documentation that you may have showing all the ways that you've been rehabilitated. So Tiffany and Brenda touched on this a little bit, but this is really your chance to shine, to show the board all the work that you've done to get to the point that you're at in your life. If you've gone through school, if you've done any sort of program, if you went through drug court or anything like that, definitely attach those certificates because those are things that really make an impression. Okay, and then I do want to go to this next slide, which we have formatted as sort of like a checklist. And I just wanted to note, I think we got this question earlier, but we will be sending out these slides to every registered attendee. So you'll get a copy of all these. And if you're going to go through the pardon process, you may even want to print this slide out and actually check it off as you're going through the process. So just not to forget all of those things that you need to attach. I think we've talked about most of these, and we have the address of the board listed there. But again, just a note on for when, depending on when you're applying, that's the address where you will mail the hard copy, the paper copy of the application. But if the board has switched over to their electronic version, you'll have to submit it electronically. So always a good idea to go onto their website and check what the status of things is. They're really good about updating the information there. And one thing we've alluded to that I want to talk about now is that once you have submitted your application to the board and they've reviewed everything, make sure they have everything they need to move your application forward, you will get contacted by an investigator from the state board who will set up a time to actually interview you. And just these are some general pointers that we have found over the course of supporting our clients through this process. So, I think it's really helpful to have some expectations going in that it's going to take several months before you actually get the call, before you hear from the board. But once they reach out to you, we have found that typically investigators are wanting to schedule those interviews rather quickly, like in the next day or several days after that. We have found that they are asking to conduct the interviews at our clients' homes. So just something to be aware of, that's what we have found is happening. And the board does note on their website that if you are out of state, if you are not living in Georgia, they are still going to require that the interview take place within the confines of the state of Georgia. However, I'll say that because of the pandemic, we have seen some of these interviews being done in a virtual format. So while there's certainly no promise that the board is going to do that, I think if you are out of state, you could definitely ask if there's a virtual option. But just to be aware that the information they're giving is that, you know, the interviews are going to take place in Georgia. So we recommend that you review your application before the interview happens. Likely it will have been several months since you wrote the application, and you want to familiarize yourself with what you said. Not that any of it would have changed or be untrue, but the experiences that we have had are that the investigator is going to ask you all the questions. They're going to go through the entire application with you, and they want to hear it in your own words. They don't want you to be reading from your application. So it's a good idea to review it ahead of time. Another reason why it's a good idea to keep a copy of what you submit, and be prepared to talk about things that maybe are not even in your application. We have found that our clients are getting asked questions about their families of origin. You know, what was it like in their house growing up? Are their parents married? Things like that. So I would suggest, if you can, to practice talking about some of these things. Practice with a loved one. If you have a lawyer, practice with your lawyer, because it can be a little difficult to talk about. You know, we find that the process can be difficult for our clients because it really, you know, forces people to confront what is often a very difficult and traumatic time in their life. So while it's definitely difficult for folks to write about those experiences, it can be even more difficult to talk about them. So practice. That's my best advice for you. And then lastly, I just want to point out that our experience has been that the investigator will show up for the interview in their uniform, with a badge, with a weapon. And again, for a lot of folks, that can be a little bit triggering or traumatic. So I think it's just helpful to know that that might happen when you're going in so that you can prepare for that. These are some of the questions that we get asked most frequently, and they address a little bit what about the what happens after the pardon. So first, I just really want to hammer home that you do not need to be an attorney to complete a pardon application. It is a lengthy application, it's a lengthy process, but you're not filing anything in court, so there is no need for you to have a lawyer. So what do you do if, and hopefully when, your pardon is granted? Well, the first thing that we always suggest is that you get another copy of your GCIC report to make sure that the pardon is being reflected on your GCIC. And then just have the pardon with you. Make a couple of copies. You know, a lot of folks there's a lot of reasons why people are seeking a pardon, but oftentimes it's because they've had trouble getting a job, getting a better job, getting a promotion, getting into housing. So just having a copy of the pardon with you and being prepared to talk about it can also be really helpful. And then, of course, see if you might be eligible to have the charge restricted and sealed from your record. If the application is denied, unfortunately, there is no appeal process. However, there's not a total roadblock. The board has said that you can apply again in 2 years. So if your application is denied, you will have another chance. And I would just encourage you to think about what are some of the ways that you might be able to be working to make your application even stronger the next time you apply. All right, great. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Dominique Madison, to talk a little bit about how you reach out to Georgia Justice Project, because while you do not need to be a lawyer to submit a pardon, it can be helpful to have an attorney assist you. And Georgia Justice Project, while we are a small nonprofit, we do have attorneys and other professionals who can assist some folks with pardon. So I am gonna stop talking and let Dominique join.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. So I know you got a lot of information in this presentation, and we will give some more about a particular clinic that we're hosting. But if you're someone who think that a pardon is the best remedy for your criminal record, or you are pardon eligible, I'm going to ask that you send our intake email. I just put it in the chat. In addition to the phone number that's listed on the screen, we have an email address that you can reach out to request an application for assistance. Now, for the upcoming clinic, we are asking for individuals to go ahead and get a Purpose Code U copy of your GCIC. That way we could go ahead and process your application and see if you are someone who will be a good fit for the upcoming pardon clinic that we're hosting. So if you think that you are eligible for a pardon, or you think you have some things on your record that are pardon eligible, go ahead and either contact the number that's on the screen, and in your voicemail, just say, I attended the pardon clinic. I would like to receive an application for assistance. Once you get the application, send the application back with a Purpose Code U copy of your GCIC. If you do not have a copy of your GCIC, that's no problem. We will grab one for you, but that would delay the time period for us getting it back and you being a part of that upcoming clinic that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Again, just so that we're all clear, go ahead and either contact the number that's on the screen, leave a message stating that you attended the pardon clinic and that you would like to receive an application, or email intake@gjp.org. And that email address, I'll put it in the chat, but it's intake@gjp.org. And in that email, just state that you attended the pardon clinic and you would like an application, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Dominique. All right, and I'm going to just very briefly talk about a new opportunity that we have. It is a very limited opportunity, but we are going to be conducting clinics where we're going to be matching Georgia Justice Project clients who need help with a pardon application with a volunteer. So just want to talk just very briefly about that process, and then we will go to questions. We want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, I know there's been a lot of great questions happening, but if you have questions, now would be a great time to go ahead and put them in the Q&A box so that we can start answering them at the end, because we're getting close to being finished now. So for those who will be working with us in a clinic setting, I just want to give you the outline of what that looks like. And the main point that I just want y'all to take away with is that preparation is really helpful for this process, no matter if you're doing a pardon application on your own or if you're going to be working with Georgia Justice Project. So prepare, prepare, prepare. Start now. Even if you're not eligible yet, it doesn't hurt to start gathering all of the information and all of the documents that you need for this process. And here is just a little list of things that we will ask folks to bring if they are going to participate in our clinic. So thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. We really appreciate it. And there is some of our social media and our contact info. At this point, I am going to stop sharing the PowerPoint and we can work on answering your questions. Right, here we are. All right. So I'm actually, one question that was asked earlier, which I think was answered, but I think more than one person might have this question, which is if somebody has a traffic conviction in the past 5 years, will that prevent them from being eligible to apply for a pardon now?
Do you want me to take that one, Erin?
Sure, that would be great.
Okay. So ideally what the board is looking for, the ideal situation is that you don't have any arrests or convictions in the 5 years before you apply. If you have a non-serious traffic offense, like you were, maybe you received a citation for speeding or turning left when you weren't supposed to, or whatever it might be, generally those aren't going to appear on your criminal history unless you miss court on down the road and get a failure to appear or something like that. But generally those less serious traffic offenses are not going to appear on your record. And kind of related to that, one thing that I wanted to mention that we've heard from the board and learned from our experience is that, say you had something on your record, say you were arrested in that 5-year period, say I was arrested for theft by shoplifting, but then the case was dismissed, like it was mistaken identity or whatever the reason the case was dismissed. What we have been told is that if you get an arrest on your record restricted and sealed, remember how I said most non-convictions are eligible to be restricted and sealed, then the board won't consider that. So the first thing you want to do if you do have something in the last 5 years, whether it's a non-conviction or maybe a misdemeanor conviction that is eligible for restriction and sealing, is deal with that stuff before you try to deal with a pardon. So again, you can reach out to our intake to figure out if there are things that that we might be able to help you with in that regard.
Great. Thanks, Brenda. This is a good question. Maybe Tiffany, you could tackle this one. Somebody wrote in that they actually already have their pardon, so congratulations. How long is the process now to get the pardon convictions restricted and sealed?
So that answer kind of depends on the process. If you're applying for restriction and sealing, you would have to submit a petition to the court and get in contact with the prosecutor, and the judge would have to sign an order allowing for that conviction to be restricted and sealed. And so I guess we've seen probably the fastest process is about 2 months, month or 2 months, possibly.
Yes, I think that's right. Thanks, Tiffany.
Okay.
Okay, let's see what other questions we have. Somebody's asking, what are the requirements for getting a waiver of the 5 or 10 year requirement? And I think maybe we could also talk a little bit more about a waiver for misdemeanors too, because I think that is related. Brenda, do you mind tackling that?
Yeah, but feel free to jump in, either of you, if you got some more information about that. So there's two. You may be able to get a waiver in 2 different ways. You may be able to get a waiver on the time frame so that you don't have to wait 5 years, or you may be able to get a waiver from the general rule that pardons are for felony convictions. In both of these circumstances, what our understanding is that you really have to have a good reason, and you have for those waivers, and you have to have documentation of that reason. So let's say you went to school to become a nurse, and you wouldn't be able to get a job or get your occupational licensing, even though you got your degree and you completed your other requirements, unless you get a pardon for an offense. And let's say it was 4 years ago and not 5 years ago. If you've got some documentation showing that, then you could apply for a waiver. I believe what we've heard is that when you do apply for a waiver, they're going to want some, in addition to the documentation showing the need for it, you would need to submit those letters of recommendation that are normally only required when you're applying for restoration of firearms rights. I remember hearing that from some folks at the board previously. Anything I'm missing there?
Nope, that covers everything that I know about the waiver. Okay. I saw another question that I thought was kind of universal. Somebody asked if they are soon to be eligible for a general pardon, should they go ahead and apply now?
Tiffany, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, you should not go ahead and apply now, but you can definitely start preparing. It's no time like the present to kind of get any documents, request any dispositions, and really look over the application and start completing it. You can file on the 5th year, and the first day you can file and have your application submitted.
To sort of piggyback off of that, a question that we get fairly frequently is, how do I know when I've hit the 5-year mark? Do you have any suggestions, Tiffany, for how folks might be able to find out when they're eligible?
Yeah, so you can obtain a certificate of completion from probation. And so they will be able to provide you with that document, and it'll say exactly when you were off sentence, so you can know when your 5-year mark is.
Brenda, how about, would you talk a little bit about whether or not people have to report when they're applying for jobs and housing? Do they need to report if they have a felony conviction that's been pardoned?
Yeah, this is a question that we get a lot because obviously we've described a very lengthy and involved process, and not a lot of people, generally the last few years, about 450 to 500 people are getting a pardon. So, you know, it's a lot to be able to get it. But like we said before, getting a pardon on your own doesn't restrict and seal anything from your record. It's just a certificate of rehabilitation. So if you're asked, have you ever been convicted, you would still need to report that honestly. So let's say you do get the pardon and then you go on and you get it restricted and sealed. Well, then can I say I've never been convicted? Georgia law, it does not allow you to deny the fact that you were convicted. So you would if asked specifically, you know, have you ever been convicted? The best practice is to answer honestly. You don't want to get into a situation where they don't hire you or they fire you because you don't pass the background check because you gave them incorrect information or you gave them false information. But what we have found is that a lot of employers are getting better, particularly in this labor market where employers are desperate to fill positions. And they're not necessarily asking, hey, tell me what's on your criminal record. They're waiting to see the report and see what shows up. So if you get the pardon and then you get it restricted and sealed and it doesn't show up, then often it's just not going to be an issue. But if you are point blank asked, have you ever been convicted? Have you ever been convicted of a felony? The best practice is to just go ahead and be honest and say, yes, but it's been pardoned and expunged. Yes, but it's been pardoned and sealed.
Great. I feel like I'm taking the easy way out because I'm just asking the questions instead of answering them. Tiffany, this question came up in the Q&A box, and it's one that we get asked a lot too. What about for somebody who has a felony conviction outside of Georgia?
So for felony convictions outside of Georgia, at the Georgia Justice Project, we can't assist you, but every single state has their own, for most states have their own pardon process. And so you have to kind of look into those particular states and what their pardon process is, but we couldn't process one through the state of Georgia.
I just want to add one thing to that. And you know, generally the state board isn't considering convictions that happened outside of Georgia. One exception to that can be related to firearms. We are not experts on firearms restoration here. We focus our limited resources where people are having trouble finding a job or getting a place to live. So if that's your situation, I recommend that you contact an attorney who specializes in firearms restoration, and we've got some referrals that we can give to you there. But otherwise, generally, what the State Board of Pardons and Paroles is considering are Georgia felony convictions.
We've had a couple of folks ask questions that are fairly specific to their individual records. So I just want to remind everyone that we would love to meet with you and talk about your individual situation. So please reach out to us. You can attend one of our first Friday presentations where we go over what is the law on record clearing in Georgia. And then you can sign up to have an intake appointment with us too. So we do want to talk to you about your situation. We're not ignoring your question. This is just not a format where we can do that. So reach out to us about those situations.
I also just want to put a plug in related to that this process we've described is very lengthy and there's a lot of documentation that you need to get. So as much as you can have prepared, even if you want help, you want to see if Georgia Justice Project can help you with your pardon, as much as you can have ready to go when you come see us, the quicker that process can go. Because often that is the longest part of our process, is saying, okay, well, you need to go get these 5 documents and then waiting for that person to get it. Sometimes we assist with getting the documentation, but you can move it along a lot quicker on your own. And also related to that, I just want to say, like we've said, you don't need an attorney. You can absolutely do this process on your own if you're comfortable with it, but you must submit a complete application. So if it says that you need any missing dispositions, it says that, you need to fill out every section. If you send in an application that doesn't have everything that they ask for, it's just going to get kicked back to you. So you don't want to waste your time and do that. So particularly around dispositions, which is the court paperwork that tells how a case was resolved on very old cases, we know that can be very difficult to find that. Dominique can attest to that probably more than anyone. It's sort of the bane of our existence, is trying to find these old records. So even if we're not assisting you, if you get stuck and you're like, I've looked everywhere, I don't know where to get this document, you can reach out to us and we can see if we can give you any guidance.
Great point. And along those lines, we've had a couple of questions about what kind of documents would be helpful or are required if somebody is self-employed. Anybody have any suggestions there?
Go for it, Tiffany.
If someone's self-employed, if you've been filing taxes through your business, that might be something that you can include. And then if you are, if your business is through the state, licensed through the state, then you might want to include that as well. I don't know any additional documents or information. What do you think, Brenda?
I think those are probably the best things to include. That is a good question that we haven't had before. So we can reach out to the board and get some more clarification about that.
I can say just anecdotally, one of my clients that I assisted with a pardon is self-employed, and during her interview, they did ask for some financial documents. So even if you have sort of your business accounts, not necessarily a bank statement, but some sort of, and I'm not an accountant, so I'm not going to use the right words, but a ledger of what's coming into your business and what's going out, that can be really helpful too.
Have we gone through all the questions? I did one thing that I've seen come up a lot and come up in other presentations that we've done is just some clarification around first offender. So I just want to reiterate that again. If you received first offender and you successfully completed your sentence and your first offender status was not revoked, then you do not need to apply for a pardon. You need to submit a petition to restrict and seal, if it hasn't already been sealed, the record of that case, but you do not need a pardon because pardons are for convictions. If you had first offender, and let's say you got in trouble or for whatever reason, the judge took away your first offender status, they revoked it, then that becomes a conviction. And you do have to, if it was a felony, then you do have to apply for a pardon. I thought of one other thing. If
Go for it.
One thing that we just wanted to mention, we talked a good bit about like the interview process and this intensive investigation process that the board has of verifying everything on your application. Part of that process will be, and I apologize if one of you mentioned it and I missed it, if there is a registered victim in your case, if your crime was against another person and that person has maintained their registration with the district attorney, then that person will be contacted about your application and have the ability to give input on that. So that is not incredibly common, but that is something that you should be aware of. And just one other thing I want to mention, we talked about when you write the section where it asks you to talk about your offense and what happened. Like we said, you don't have to go into a lot of detail, but what we have heard from the board is if it was a violent offense, if it was a crime against another person, then you want to provide more detail, or if it was a residential burglary. Those are the two categories that have specifically been mentioned to us in the past that you want to go into more detail. And you also just want to make sure you have a really strong application that you are submitting, because those are things that the board is more concerned about.
Okay, I think there are two more questions. One is, what if somebody was convicted of a serious violent felony? I guess maybe we could review whether or not they're eligible for a pardon and then whether or not they'd be eligible for restriction and sealing after that. And part two of that is, what if they were convicted of a series of offenses, one of which is a serious violent felony and the rest are not, so lesser offenses? What happens in that case?
I'm happy to start, and then Tiffany or Aaron, if you want to add in. So in terms of applying for a pardon, there is no exclusion on particular offenses. You can apply for a pardon for a felony conviction. Like I just said when I was talking about the description of the offenses, the more serious the offense, if it was a serious violent felony, you do want to make sure you've got a really strong application and you've got a lot of good things to say to the board, to show them what you've done and demonstrate your rehabilitation. Like we've said before, even if it's not required because you're not applying for firearms restorations, you might want to include those letters of recommendation and things, because they are going to look more, they look closely at every application, but certainly those applications are going to receive higher scrutiny. Under the law that passed in 2020 and went into effect last year, if you get a pardon for a serious violent felony, so that's your murder, your rape, aggravated assault, those, or a serious sex offense, you cannot then get it restricted and sealed. Those are just not included in the law. And I've already forgotten what the second part of the question was.
No, it was a long question. I'm not surprised. What if there were other charges connected to that charge?
That's a little bit of a tricky question, and I would like to reach out to our contacts at the board and ask them about it. What I think, but I'd like to verify this, is that you could apply for a pardon. Well, like I said, you can apply for a pardon of any offenses. So if the question is then, well, let's say, I was convicted of, armed robbery and felony possession of drugs or something, and you get a pardon for both of those. My understanding of the law is that you could then apply to restrict the record of the one that was not a serious violent felony offense. But it's a little bit more challenging because when you seal something, you're sealing like the record of the case, and the record of the case includes both of those charges. So that is going to be a much harder case to make.
Great. Okay, and the last question that I think we get asked frequently, but I don't think we've covered yet is, do folks have a better chance of getting a pardon if they have an attorney help them with the application?
We've been told no, and you know, I fully believe that. We've got a good working relationship and have met with members of the State Board of Pardons and Parole staff to talk to them, and they're not, you know, they're not going to hold it against you that you didn't have an attorney, that you couldn't afford an attorney at all. But they want to see a complete application. They want to see a strong application. So if you feel like you need an attorney to be able to put that together, then that's when you might want to consider applying to us if you can't afford an attorney, because we only represent people that cannot afford an attorney, or if you're in a position to be able to pay an attorney to do that.
Great. Last call for questions from the audience. Any attendees have any last questions? Oh, right in time. Okay, somebody else says, wait, I'm typing. Okay, we'll stay on. We'll stay on. So what about for someone who was a juvenile at the time but tried as an adult?
This is not a situation that we've had before, so I can't speak from experience, but I can't see anything in what we know about the process of why that would be treated differently if you were convicted. But you should know that the things that you're tried for as an adult when you were a juvenile are those serious violent felonies and sex offenses. So you could apply for the pardon, but you might not be able to get it sealed afterwards. But that pardon is still valuable, and it gives you that certificate of rehabilitation.
Okay. So a lot of questions about how folks can get our referral list of attorneys who work on pardons and restoration of firearms rights. So please just reach out to us. We can provide that to you. You can email intake@gjp.org. We're happy to provide you the list of folks that we know who do this work.
Right, we ended in the time that we said we were going to. This is a good accomplishment for us.
Right. Yes, thank you all so much. I appreciate everybody joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.